protocol is one of the largest, or the largest decentralized exchange protocol in crypto, specifically on Ethereum first, but as many folks also know, it's launched on a few other chains at this point as well. And the Uniswap Foundation supports the protocol and ecosystem through deploying grants. We have a team that runs initiatives to support the ecosystem and community, and we also work with the community to get up and running working groups and other community-run initiatives to support everyone.
Hey everyone, my name is David Gogel. I'm the VP of Strategy and Operations at the DYDX Foundation. We're a Switzerland-based foundation. Our mission is to support and grow the DYDX protocol by enabling communities, developers, and decentralized governance. For those of you that don't know, DYDX protocol is also one of the leading decentralized exchanges, currently focused on perpetuals on Ethereum, with plans to launch our own app chain on the Cosmos ecosystem later this year. I was also early involved with the Penn Blockchain Club in its early days, and I'm a proud Wharton MBA and undergrad graduate from this fine institution. So happy to be back here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, excellent. Hey guys, this is Varun here, the co-founder and CEO at Hashflow. And for those of you who don't know, Hashflow is also a decentralized exchange protocol. We started about a year and a half ago. And we're currently focused on particularly institutional market makers to onboard them and connect them to professional traders around the world. So that's a short intro from my side.
Hey guys, I'm Jason Huan. I'm one of the co-founders of Frax, which is an algorithmic stablecoin that was started in 2019 and was launched end of 2020, so towards sort of the end of the early era of DeFi. We came to prominence being one of the first algorithmic stablecoins that actually worked and have deployed many innovations that are sort of unique to stablecoins, including mechanisms on Curve, Uniswap, Compound, and so on. We have a couple of cool new features I've been working on recently. Then as for myself, I came from UCLA, current grad student there, mostly doing research these days, so I'm a bit less hands-on in the protocol now, mostly just doing things in academia, but also happy to sort of keep looking for the next innovation.
Thank you for the intros. One of the things about DeFi is that a lot of people consider it as the kind of cornerstone sector of the industry, right? Especially due to its longevity. I mean, Maker being founded back in like 2014 really set the kind of foundational building blocks of like, okay, what are the core use cases that crypto can provide? And a lot of that is derived from this idea of how are we actually able to achieve product market fit when it comes to what users actually want and need and what can crypto provide them? So I'd be really curious to hear, especially from your perspectives, what do you think are the key variables that define product market fit for DeFi protocols? And I would love like an answer that really focuses on your specific product sector. So whether it's an AMM or a pro protocol or specifically like a stable coin, what do you think are the key variables that really define that for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick things off for Uniswap. So as Tuna mentioned, we're an automated market maker, decentralized exchange, and I can't really think of, if you had to choose a metric that defined what is product market fit for Uniswap, I think volume is really the obvious one. I can't think of a better kind of proof or better evidence that swappers, integrators, developers who are building applications on Uniswap are getting use out of the protocol than actual swapping volume. And I think right now Uniswap has certainly, in my opinion, achieved that for the crypto trading, potentially, speculation use case. And I guess you said, what are the inputs to that as well?
Yeah, I'd say like the main question is like, if volume is kind of the backbone, how do we derive that volume is actually providing value or actually contributing to the core use case that you want Uniswap to provide? Like, what are the key inputs that are determining, like, okay, this volume is actually providing value to the core value proposition of an AMM?
Yeah, so I guess some of the, if I'm like understanding that correctly, I think some of the inputs to that are obviously minimal slippage, like at least for like the 20 or 30% of volume, which is coming from aggregators, which are algorithmically looking for the best price, having the most liquidity concentrated around market price, so giving the best price to users will automatically, you know, derive more volume. That's on, I guess, like the I guess like LP side of things. On the interface side of things, like making it super easy to integrate into the protocol for integrators to have either, you know, primary source of liquidity or a backstop for long tail assets, for instance, flowing liquidity to Uniswap. And those are two areas that we're focused on, either funding easier integration tools, dev tools, more education around that, and also making it easier for liquidity providers to not only LP, but to also generate profit, hedge, et cetera, on the other side of things.
Yeah, so it's kind of the mix of these product features actually being able to interoperate with a whole bunch of different pre-existing kind of protocols and mechanisms. I'm curious, Varun, within that context, does this change for Hashflow? You have a different mechanism focusing on servicing market makers as liquidity providers. Are these variables different in your eyes?
Well, I think the main variables include, you know, the metrics like volume and DAUs. They're you know, quite similar in the sense that, you know, we look at like how much volume are we driving daily and how many DAUs is it coming from, and is it like native to the product or is it coming from aggregators and so on. But I think more broadly speaking, when I think about product market fit, I think the one is obviously you're looking at the cryptosphere and DeFi, but then how much of the DeFi volume are you taking? But then also it's interesting to see how much of the just overall crypto volume are you able to capture? Because if you look at like the DEX volume compared to something like Binance, they still have like nearly 90% of the market share. And one of the things that makes it interesting is like, you know, the user experience and how people get onboarded onto that and abstracting away the complexity that comes from like, you know, using DeFi products. So that's something that, you know, we've been focused on, and how do we abstract away all the complexity and offer users as simple of an experience as possible to capture more of that market share, right? Not just in terms of volume, but also DAUs and just general retail that goes beyond, like, you know, people who are more native to DeFi. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo a lot of the points that you made, right? Like, we would call DYDX one of the leading decentralized exchanges from a volume standpoint. We've done anywhere between 500 million to $5 or $10 billion in volume every day. We have about 2,000 daily active traders, about 5,000 weekly active traders, and about 10 or 15,000 monthly active traders. But we only have, you know, single-digit % market share in terms of like volumes traded in crypto. So, you know, while in a lot of ways, you know, I say these metrics, and yes, those are good numbers, like internally we think we only have okay product market fit, and it's something that even, you know, a company of our size and scale, it's something we think a lot about. How do you actually build a product that people love and want to use, and how do you actually attract more flows away from centralized exchanges and outside of crypto to DeFi and DEX land? There's a lot of work that goes into that, but we think a lot about retention. We think a lot about both top of funnel and bottom of funnel metrics along the lines of what my two peers have said up here.
From a perspective of stablecoins, I think product market fit is interesting because you're not dealing with necessarily a platform as much as you are sort of, you know, the integration of a unit of account that people are able to sort of plug in at the wallet layer, right, and sort of the asset layer instead of simply just a platform that goes between things, right? So I think for stablecoins and more broadly, platforms of this sort, or, you know, protocols of this sort, have to worry more about specific integrations than broadly servicing a wider range of users or other platforms. And so I think for stablecoins themselves, one of the keys of product market fit is are people willing to hold this stablecoin relative to other stablecoins when they're trading, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be for paying the rent or something of that sort, but are they okay using this as a trading pair, right? And you've seen this sort of on exchanges. There's like Gemini USD on the sort of US side of things. There's Binance USD on sort of the international side of things. And I think for DeFi and in the era of DeFi, the actual proliferation of platforms like DYDX and Uniswap have allowed for decentralized stablecoins to actually have some footing when it comes to this sort of previously centralized stablecoin landscape.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, especially given the context of like how controversial stablecoins usually are, especially within the context of like the regulatory context as well. I think one question I want to ask you, Jason, to kind of dig deeper into that is when it comes to kind of the current product market fit of Frax, you talk about Frax with respect to other stablecoin options. What does product market fit for Frax look like agnostic to other stablecoins? Is there an end state for a stablecoin like Frax that you see? What does that end state look like?
I think the sort of vision for stablecoins long term is actually more of the crypto and blockchain ecosystem adapting to it rather than stablecoins adapting to the rest of the world, right? There's always sort of this grand vision of, when stablecoins were just a conception of like, hey, instead of just having, peer-to-peer digital cash with Bitcoin, you have peer-to-peer digital cash that is actually price stable, right, or value stable. And so that is sort of the second revolution within crypto itself, not only having decentralized money, but having something that you can hold and that you don't have to check day to day. And so I think the long-term vision for a product like this, or sort of, a conception like this is actually not to have the rest of the market try to sort of catch up to it, but it being sort of the base layer for economic activity on blockchains. So I think a long-term vision for stablecoins is actually just in the same way that you have your Venmo balance or your bank balance, you don't actually think of those as, Venmo dollars or, Wells Fargo dollars, right? They're just dollars to you. So I think for stablecoins, it'd be a similar use case where the abstraction sort of just becomes part of the whole idea.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I want to dig a little bit more into specifically kind of now looking forward, now that we have like some general themes we want to look forward to, some kind of like smaller steps when it comes to what kind of steps are we taking with product focuses within your respective protocols to kind of bring us to this like forward-facing future. I want to start with you, Devin, and I know there's been a lot of talk about V3 specifically in this concept of concentrated liquidity. You're sacrificing a lot of like the LP UX for the end user being like the swapper. How do you contend with this kind of dichotomy between this balance between the LP and the end user UX, especially given like how V3 really flipped that on its head? And what does that look like when it comes to building the Uniswap ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. For those of you who don't know, so concentrated liquidity is this concept that was introduced in Uniswap v3, and it was kind of a jump from v1 and v2, this idea of passively providing liquidity from price 0 to infinity, to allowing a liquidity provider to actually provide liquidity within some custom range, potentially around the market price, or if they have a view on where prices will go or want to implement another kind of strategy, providing it away from the market price, which has the implication of reducing slippage for end users, but also allowing the LPs to have more flexibility in how they're deploying their capital. As Chunda alluded to, there has been a lot of discussion, debate, and I think fair critiques around what some implications for some liquidity providers are with concentrated liquidity, particularly around profitability and ease of use. So what I can say is the foundation is very excited to support a number of projects which are digging into both of those areas for the benefit of current LPs, but also the future set of LPs, both beginner and advanced, that we hope to shepherd into the ecosystem. So a few grants which we're funding, which we've either recently funded or will be funded in the most recent round of wish list grants or RFPs, which we tweeted about last week and will be determined later this month, is a survey of current LPs with the goal of summarizing the kinds of strategies or approaches that LPs take. Something that's interesting about liquidity provision is that LPs, are not just traditional market makers. They might be leveraging LP positions to place something similar to a limit order or something similar to kind of like an option strategy. So making, clear the fact that this is a tool that can be used to, deploy a number of kind of strategies, while also making clear what kind of hedging strategies are available for LPs. I think that is still very opaque. We're funding an LP university for beginner LPs to learn the basics, and also tools for intermediate and advanced LPs to broaden and deepen their tool sets. And when it comes to kind of growth, and onboarding the next set of LPs who we hope to kind of grow exponentially the TVL of the protocol. We're funding interviews with financial institutions, with the end product and output of that being specifications for the kinds of tooling and products, for instance, focused on like compliance tooling and other kind of like operational tools that are required to bring on, the hedge funds of the world. That aren't already integrated into Uniswap onto Uniswap. So definitely very focused on education, tooling, specifications for other programs that can close the gaps that currently exist.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It seems to be kind of like an ecosystem growth, ecosystem product focused kind of strategy of building these better incentivization mechanisms for kind of the liquidity provider side of things. I actually want to ask you, Jason, a question specifically when it comes to designing incentives. DeFi 1.0 or the historical era of 1.0 and that time period was really the time period that set the foundational building blocks of what the core financial products would be in the industry. 2.0 and kind of the era that Frax was born out of really defined like, okay, we have these foundational building blocks. How do we incentivize their use? How do we build better monetization strategies? How do you kind of approach this idea of, especially within the context of Frax and its integration to like curve convex flywheel, how do you think about building incentivization strategies, whether it's for bootstrapping liquidity or allowing users to adopt Frax as kind of that unit of account? What do you think about building incentivization mechanisms, especially like post DeFi 2.0?
That's a really good question. With regarding sort of building incentivization strategies, one thing I guess is to always just have it in the back of your mind. So whenever you sort of think of a new idea or a new integration, you generally are able to get some sort of network effect with these services already sort of on the platform. Like for example, if you have a native stablecoin actually expanding to doing an AMM or doing some sort of lending is actually more natural than actually having to go externally and do a simple integration. So I think incentivizing the user to sort of stay on the platform or stay sort of nearby the platform is actually one thing that is really good for incentivizing them to keep staying in the platform. So it's almost a virtuous cycle of the more utility you can offer, the better it is for the user, right? So in some sense, this sort of super linear scaling of utility is actually just like the definition of a network effect, right? You get the more people, so the more utility there is, the better it is for the user, vice versa. And I think there's actually sort of a kind of a higher order question here, right? Is like with simple incentivization, right? Like how did this space start off with DeFi 1.0 into 2.0? And I think the actual concept here is actually token distribution mechanisms, right? With liquidity mining, which was sort of the reason why all things got the flywheel that they did, you're actually solving the problem that was first solved with Bitcoin back in the proof of work mining days. I mean, it still is, but back in the day, it was more so how do we start a network of Bitcoins and get the right tokens in the right people's hands, right? And the idea of anyone being able to sort of join the network and start mining and start getting tokens is actually a fundamental problem that I think is sort of the real problem behind the scenes, or the real question to be actually asked, rather than some of the more surface level metrics. The idea of doing token distribution in a good manner that's sort of virtuous and gets people more into the system and more sort of, missionaries for the platform is actually one reason that I think crypto stays alive between market cycles and simply just doesn't really die off. You're able to actually sort of get this long-term participant view for people who are first bought into the platform. And I think that sort of conversion happens when you do a correct or a virtuous token distribution mechanism like Bitcoin mining, like proof of stake staking, or with DeFi, liquidity mining.
Interesting. I think one common counter argument to that, I think less from the protocol side, because from the protocol side or like the core protocol side, yeah, a lot of people justify token emissions with the fact that it's a byproduct of just paying for block space, right? I think a lot more people have contention with this idea of liquidity incentives being vampiric to the underlying value of DeFi protocols, especially because you're essentially, eating into your own market share by emitting or increasing the supply, or essentially diluting the supply of your core value. How do you contend with that counter argument? How do you build systems that make sure that we don't fall into this pitfall?
I think it's a really good question, right? Because on the surface layer, if you do sort of the back of the napkin calculations, you could be saying, hey, we're emitting $1 million, $3 million, $5 million of incentives each day. Where would this show up on a traditional balance sheet, right? And I think the idea is to actually not even think in that direction, or to avoid getting stuck into the sort of traditional mindset of viewing these things as sort of equities or whatever, and actually look at these things from a first principle perspective, which would be, these don't show up as cost like line items on a sort of expense report, right? These aren't sort of you losing dollars on a balance sheet. These are actually, like in terms of token emissions, these are actually variable, right? So in some sense, yeah, you are paying out the current market value of these incentives per day, but in the long-term view, these actually might be generating value for your protocol, right? It seems a bit counterintuitive at first, but the idea is that actually getting these tokens into the right people's hands will actually generate you more value than you're losing, because if you were to hypothetically sell the token, which is the whole frame that we're coming from here, right? You would get some sort of dollar value for the assets at the current moment in time, but sort of not having to sort of peg it down to a specific point in time, and looking at this from an aggregate view, where sort of each action in the protocol defines the future path of it. You emit these tokens, but what you're really doing is you're sort of placing some sort of bet on the long-term outcome of the protocol, right? And so allowing that value sort of token distribution actually is able to sort of hypothetically create value creation, right? And I think the other part of it is actually just building a network that's useful enough that allows you to have these things that become realized value, not simply just inflation.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And it ties back into what you're talking about before about, in order to really incentivize your users to actually achieve product market fit with your product, whether it's stablecoin, DEX, AMM, or so on, you need to keep people within the ecosystem. But if you keep people within the ecosystem, you create a value flywheel, which inherently can give value to, token emissions, whether it's, maybe inflationary at first, but you can kind of create that, use that to bootstrap the flywheel. This is interesting because I think one aspect of DeFi and kind of what we're looking at for the next step is we're trying to work on the fixing the problems of DeFi 1.0. But I think another thing we realize is there are other things outside of incentivization which are new problems that we have to contend with. One of which being kind of the role of MEV, specifically within AMM and DEX design. I know Varun, Hashflow is specifically focused on trying to mitigate the role of MEV within AMMs and the user experience for people interacting with them. What do you see as the end state for AMM and DEX design in terms of mitigating MEV? And what does that end state look like with the fact that layer one protocols are currently attempting or putting in the roadmaps to build protocol enshrined methodologies of mitigating MEV? DEXs and AMM still going to have a role in that, or is this something that's going to be outsourced to the underlying L1s?
So I think I'll start with defining what MEV is for many people. So
Yes.
It starts with maximal extractable value, or previously minor extractable value. But what it really means is it's a value that you can take away by having the power to have the last look on a transaction, and also the ability to reorg the transactions in a block. So for example, if I'm a miner who is producing blocks and arranging transactions in a block, and I also get to have the last look on the incoming transactions, then I can use that information to order transactions in such a way that actually benefits me, right? A good example here, in this case, is a sandwich attacks, where if I see an incoming ETH trade that I think could be profitable, then what I would do is I would do a trade that moves the price a bit, and then I will do another trade that moves the price back in my favor, and then I'll insert the transaction that is incoming in between those two to basically, extract value from it. And this usually happens if you're using on-chain pricing mechanism, where anytime you transact on-chain, the price moves in a certain direction, and you can use that, that power coupled with the ability to reorder transactions to extract value, right? So what we've been doing with Hashflow is to prevent this is we basically decouple the pricing logic from on-chain to off-chain, where at the moment you no longer rely on on-chain pricing mechanism and have basically market makers or anybody who is actually proposing, who is setting the price off-chain, have them cryptographically sign the transaction. Then you're basically able to circumvent this issue, because even though your miner has the last look, or anybody has the last look on incoming transactions, they can't really do anything about it, because even though they know the incoming transaction and what's going to happen with that, they cannot influence the price simply by front-running that, right? So because it's already been agreed upon between the two parties off-chain, and then it's been signed already. So all you're doing on-chain is the execution part, where you move funds between the two wallets, but then the actual price discovery itself is taking place off-chain, right? So there's pros and cons to this design. The benefits is obviously, from a trading perspective, you have more guarantees in terms of the execution of the trade, and you know exactly what the price is going to be. You won't be seeing any surprises. You can do interesting things like cross-chain, and once again, not worry about the time lags and therefore the price being impacted because of that. And you can also price any asset class, including not limited to spot, right? So you can do options and futures and so on. The cons of the design, obviously, is it's the liveness assumption, because when you're doing everything on-chain, then you're basically live for so long as the underlying L1 is alive, right? And no one can take you down ever. But on the other hand, if you rely on anything off-chain mechanism, then you sort of rely on the off-chain party to be reliable, right? And if they stop functioning, then your platform may not be live. So, but that said, you can technically achieve 99.99% liveness, in which case this trade-off is okay, is my opinion, right? So I think other people might differ in that sense, but that's where we stand.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious what you think about systems like this. Do they have a place in the future where, like, the core protocols are trying to mitigate MEV? Because it sounds like this is a very specialized system that's focused on really tackling, like, the current state of how MEV operates on chain. What happens when we, do things like, let's say, randomized ordering of transactions and blocks, right? If that's something that becomes protocol enshrined, what does that mean for a protocol like Hashflow?
I think, at the end of the day, I think there's a room for both, like, AMMs or hybrid approaches, where there's no one ring to rule them all kind of situation, right? So you can take away MEV parts, but also at the same time, the way you price, at the end of the day, if you're talking from a trading perspective, the most efficient way to have price discovery is through order matching, right, or limit order books, right? And then many times when you trade on chain, you usually, the way you're working is you're using the price that is discovered on limit order books, and you use that as a price reference to arbitrage, arb against any on-chain pricing mechanisms, right? And that's kind of what sets the cycle that continues to grow. So at the end of the day, I think there's a room for both, where if you want to do like high frequency trading or actually just have price discovery for assets, then you would need limit order books. And on the other hand, if you want platform making people can just simply just put money in and have markets right away, then there's room for AMMs to do that, right? So I think it's not like one thing to rule them all, rather there's a market for everything. So at the end of the day, it comes down to what kind of user abstraction do you offer to make the UX simple for anyone to go and use, right? So.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one kind of question I think that stems out of that when you say, there's not really one ring to rule them all is the role of the more centralized counterparts of your protocols. David, I'm curious to think, V4 and moving to Cosmos and being able to create a more custom execution environment was really focused on being able to take DYDX to the next level and providing a lot closer parity to its centralized counterparts within like perp markets and perp-based solutions. Do you think V4 or a kind of a specialized custom solution like that can reach parity with your centralized counterparts, or do you think it will require always some kind of like off-chain solution in order to actually be able to reach that parity?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Maybe just taking a step back, if you look at the history of the DYDX protocol, the product suite has kind of evolved over time. The first kind of versions of the protocol were lending and borrowing pools on Ethereum, then on layer 1, then the launch of perpetual markets on layer 1. At the time of kind of DeFi summer, it became very clear that from a user experience standpoint, spending $100, $200 just to deposit to a smart contract was a really poor user experience. So the DYDX team made a decision almost 2.5 years ago now to be really one of the first major protocols to move to L2. At the time, they did a survey of different L1 options, different L2 options, and ultimately decided to use Starkware as an L2 solution with settlement on Ethereum. And that's really kind of been the core product of the DYDX team for the last 1.5 years. They've done over $700 billion in cumulative volume and really scaling low cost, non-custodial trading off-chain. The way that kind of that architecture exists today, there's on-chain components, there's off-chain components. The protocol is fully non-custodial. At no point in time do you entrust your funds to the DYDX team. They're in a smart contract. You can deposit, withdraw at any time. But there's an off-chain order book and matching engine, which is centralized on a server that allows for high performance API trading, et cetera. And that's kind of the trade-offs that exist in the system today. The team has since announced kind of their plans to launch the next version of the protocol, which they call V4, which is an app chain on Cosmos, so leveraging the Cosmos SDK and a Tendermint proof-of-stake consensus mechanism to effectively provide a more fully decentralized trading experience that is also high performant. I think we've spent a lot of time thinking about, why bet the house on kind of this grandiose vision, and the reality is, any system is only decentralized as its most centralized component. And for us, given a lot of the activity that's occurred, in the last year or 2 years, we really think that to be able to compete with the large centralized exchanges of the world, we have to embrace kind of the unknown and really push the decentralization feature as far as we can. Why an app chain versus other L2s versus other L1s? I think a big issue with a lot of L2s today, again, is kind of the sequencer, and that's a big part that remains centralized. There's a lot of activity and developers working to decentralize that component, but our team thought that they could have kind of more sovereignty owning that part of the stack. And then when you think about an order book and matching engine, especially that focuses on high performance, today we have on average about 10 trades per second and about 1,000 orders or cancellations per second. There's not a single existing L1 or L2 that would be able to scale, orders of magnitude that amount of transactions. And so the beauty of an app chain or an application-specific chain is that you can really customize the chain to the business logic of your specific application. So for something like a perpetuals trading experience for professional traders, having that ability to really customize the order book, the matching engine, and the business logic is something that our team was really excited about. So the big innovation with V4 is that the validators will be running the order book and matching engine in memory, which allows kind of a decentralized order book and matching engine with a settlement on the app chain, and that allows just for a lot of scalability while maintaining that core feature of decentralization. So our view is that that is potentially and hopefully a winning solution for us to be able to compete with the centralized exchanges of the world and really bring and improve kind of the user experience and bring it on par to a lot of like centralized peers, but have the whole underlying infrastructure be completely decentralized and trustless.
Yeah, I'm curious to extend this question to both Hashflow and Uniswap as well, especially because both of you take kind of different trade-offs when it comes to product design, when it comes to this idea of being able to compete with a centralized counterpart, for example, being centralized exchanges, on a more holistic level outside of just perpetuals. What do you think about this kind of challenge of reaching parity? Is there an end state where there can be a preordained DEX that works better than a centralized exchange, or at least the trade-offs are minimal enough to where DEXs can become like the end state? Or do you think there's always going to be kind of like a distribution of kind of use cases based off of like risk and what users are willing to kind of put on themselves when it comes to putting their assets within the custody of a different party?
Yeah, sure. I can kind of take this first from Uniswap's perspective. I mean, I think my kind of core answer to that question is grounded in the fact that it's not like a zero-sum game. Like there's not, I mean, I think the core, something that excites me a lot about Uniswap is the fact that it's actually expanding the number and kind and diversity of assets and ideas that can now be not only represented on chain, but can be given a price by virtue of the fact that it's now permissionless. Anyone can kind of create a liquidity pool for an asset, whether it's a community-based asset, like an in-game asset. It's now very easy to do that. So when it comes to I don't know, commodities, real-world assets, et cetera, of course there are, I think, advantages to trading on a DEX versus a centralized exchange. I think FTX did a very good job of illustrating that to us all at the end of last year. Having user protections and the rules of the exchange ingrained on chain, so you can trust that when you trade, this is how pricing will work. You don't have to worry about any fraud or anyone taking the anyone kind of like misusing your funds by virtue of the fact that you have like self-custody. Philosophically, if you're aligned with censorship resistance, permissionlessness, DEXs are obviously the way to go. And then looking at the advantages of using a DEX for markets like FX, Uniswap Labs and Circle just released a paper that kind of spoke to some of the efficiencies and benefits of using a protocol like an AMM for FX markets over the existing infrastructure, which leverages like a number of kind of intermediaries from one party to the other for things like remittances. But I think I also want to kind of like hone in on that fact again, that I think DEXs actually expand the way that we can actually think about how exchanges are used, given some of its underlying characteristics. And I think that ultimately doesn't make it a zero-sum game. I think ultimately there's room for both, but I think DEXs kind of speak to a new space of kinds of markets to attack.
Yeah, I think to what Devin said, I echo with that. So generally, it's not a zero-sum game, right? So there is a world in which both DEXs and centralized exchanges can exist, but I think generally, taking away, even abstracting away the whole idea of DEX or centralized venue, because the end user doesn't really care about any of those things, right? So they just want to go and trade and have a good experience. So at that point, it comes down to what is that ideal experience that you're looking for, where people get to trade, but then also don't have to worry about the counterparty risk that comes with, what happened with FTX. And this was interesting because we were just doing a survey and asking our users and even the market makers that provide liquidity on the platform to say, what is that one thing that's going to help them, move if they were to consider moving from a centralized venue to a decentralized venue, and what's missing at the moment. So I think the general response was they really had no incentive to move from something like Deribit or Binance unless we can offer something similar or superior in terms of UX, but without the counterparty risk, right? So which kind of tells a story that basically if you really want to capture that market share and then bring those users to decentralize or just take away this abstraction away completely, then really what you're looking for is how do you build a user experience that is very similar in terms of using something like Robinhood or Binance or something like that, but doesn't come with the counterparty risk, which comes with you custodying your funds with a centralized venue, right? So in general, I think users are looking for something that is much easier to use, but also don't have to worry about things that are unknown, but at the same time, don't have to also worry about their funds being stolen, right? So that's what really comes down to how do you meet, and where is that sweet spot? There's multiple solutions and approaches to that, right? You can go the hybrid model, you could go for everything on chain, never touch anything off chain, right? So, or what DYDX is doing, running an in-memory order book across multiple validators. There's, or you can just run a Serum order book on Solana or something like that. So there's multiple ways to attack that problem. So we don't know if there's a clear winner yet, but I think the problem is pretty clear, is how do you build that centralized exchange-like UX without the counterparty risk, right? And how do we get to that? There's N ways to get to it, so we don't know the perfect way yet.
Maybe just to react to that, I think it's really interesting, post the FTX kind of last few weeks, you'd think that it would be kind of DeFi and DEX land's time to shine. And we definitely saw an increase in users that came to DYDX as an example. I'm sure it's the same at other decentralized exchanges, but there was kind of a big influx and then mean reversion. And if you look at market share and volume, frankly, the biggest benefactor of kind of everything that happened at FTX is Binance. So users kind of have pretty short-term memory when it comes to what counterparty risk really means, or don't care about self-custody. I don't actually think it's enough to just have a decentralized exchange that reaches feature parity with a centralized exchange to be able to win in this market. I think we think a lot about what is kind of the area that we can have, a 10x improvement over an existing alternative to really motivate people to come. And I'm not convinced quite yet that non-custody, trustlessness, permissionlessness, these are all very complicated terms for people to understand. They're not what's going to get, your average user to convert. And even, with a big crisis like what happened over the last few weeks, clearly the industry needs to think through a little bit more, how can we really find the areas that we can differentiate ourselves and try to hook people based on that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I think this calls back to the conversation that we had yesterday on the scaling panel, where I asked them what was the kind of one thing that's going to bring on the next 100 million, 1 billion users, and the answer was account abstraction. Because at the end of the day, it's all about, I said account abstraction. Because at the end of the day, it's really going to be about like what is going to create the user experience that allows users to feel the 10x improvement. And it sounds like the next step for DeFi is along those lines as well. And with that being said, that is the end of our time. Let's give a round of applause to everyone on stage right now. And real quick, I'd love for you all to share how people can reach you or your socials or however you like to share your output or for your respective protocols in case anyone wants to reach out or learn more.
Yeah, best way to get at me or the foundation today is on Twitter, Uniswap FND and Devin A. Walsh. I think both have open DMs, so shoot us a note and I'd love to chat with anyone.
Same. Can contact me on Twitter, dgogel or DYDX Foundation. And if you're a Penn or Penn affiliated, you can also reach me via QuakerDAO. Thanks.
So for Hashflow, Twitter DMs, you can just @Hashflow, and then you can just DM us directly. And personally for me, my handle is Gandalf the Brown, so you can just DM me there on Twitter as well. So.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is not nearly as good as that. It's just @JasonHuan_. From Twitter or Telegram @JasonHuan. Also, we have Frax has a large Telegram community, so I guess anything protocol specific can also just throw it in the group chat.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. Our next panel will be on governance, mechanics, and delegation. We'll be bringing in a lot of different leaders in terms of governance, governance delegation, and this will be led by Jun Sun, who actually leads a lot of governance initiatives here at Penn as well. So without further ado, I'd love to give a warm welcome to Jun and the panelists. Sorry, 1 second.